When considering the prevalence of abuse in LGBT relationships, we believe that it happens to a similar level as in non-LGBT relationships. In fact, the Count Me In 2 study has indicated that around 1 in 3 LGBT people will experience some form of domestic violence in their lifetime, and actually for trans-identified people that number is much, much higher. Unfortunately, it is an under-researched area, so we don't have the level and the breadth of research available to us to understand more and be able to track the prevalence of LGBT domestic violence as we do with non-LGBT relationships. I think that the lack of research is one of the reasons that we don't hear so much about abuse in LGBT relationships, but it's not the only reason. There are also factors such as there are quite a lot of hidden cases of LGBT domestic violence. For example, at Marrocks, we are not seeing a proportionate number of LGBT cases being heard. And I think that is partly because those cases actually are being heard, but they're not being identified as LGBT because monitoring hasn't been carried out. But I think it's also because professionals may not feel confident or equipped to identify cases of LGBT domestic violence, to assess the risk appropriately, and to make referrals and offer support. Also, a massive factor is that many LGBT people feel really scared and really ashamed and really worried about seeking advice and help if they've got concerns about what's happening in their relationship. And they may worry about experiencing discrimination from professionals or from services. They may not be completely out as LGBT in all areas of their life. And actually, if they were going to go and tell someone that they think they might be experiencing abuse, they would have to expose themselves as LGBT. And that may not be something that they feel safe to do or that they are ready to do. There are a number of unique risk factors and barriers facing young LGBT people when it comes to domestic abuse. One thing that we know happens is that when an LGBT person is experiencing domestic violence, that their abuser will often specifically use their gender or sexual identity against them as part of the pattern of abuse and power and control. And so it may be that they threaten to out them to other people or tell them that no one will believe them about what's happening because of their LGBT identity. Now that can have a really, really damaging impact on anyone, but I think particularly for younger LGBT people who may be in the midst of establishing and exploring their sexual and gender identity, the effects of that can be really, really devastating. And actually it can create and sort of reinforce internalized homophobia, biphobia and transphobia, and render that person quite silenced to actually seek help and cause them to blame themselves for the abuse taking place in the first place. I think there's also a lack of role models and a lack of resources for younger LGBT people to be talking about what it is that they want from their relationships, and that the resources available to teachers and support workers and domestic violence workers are very, very focused on non-LGBT relationships. And actually there isn't much space or much guidance for younger LGBT people to think about what they want from their intimate relationships and what might be healthy and what might be acceptable or unacceptable behaviour. It's also really important to consider the role of families, who are often a key source of support for young people experiencing abuse in a relationship. That may well not be the case for LGBT younger people because they may not be out to their families, or their families may not be supportive of their identity. So that can increase the risk. We can also consider the fact that LGBT young people are at increased risk of family abuse, and that actually if someone's family or their culture, community or religious group is not supportive of their identity or feels that they have brought shame upon their family or their community, that they may be at risk of honour-based violence. We know that younger LGBT people can often be abused by their family or even asked to leave the family home or family unit as a result of their identity. You can then have young LGBT people homeless, perhaps relocating to new areas on their own and being very, very vulnerable to being exploited by someone who wants to be controlling, perhaps someone who is significantly older than them and who will abuse them. So you may have someone who perhaps by the age of 18 has already experienced familial abuse, being rejected from the family home, homelessness, and then intimate partner abuse as well. There are a number of things that professionals can do to better meet the needs of LGBT young people around issues of domestic violence. One thing that's really important is to consider the resources that you have available to you and to make sure that they include resources that make reference to a wide range of identities and types of relationships. Also, services can be considering where they are advertising and promoting their service and trying to advertise their service in spaces where younger LGBT people may go and take responsibility for sort of proactively communicating that you are LGBT affirmative as an agency. It's also really important that professionals accurately ask monitoring questions and ask clients about their sexual orientation, their gender identity, and whether their gender identity is the same as it was when it was assigned at birth. This is important in terms of monitoring services and tracking the prevalence of LGBT domestic violence, but it's also really important in terms of best meeting the needs of that client. It's really important not to make assumptions about someone's identity. You cannot tell whether someone is LGBT or not by the way that they look or by the person that they're in a relationship with. And it's really important to feel confident in asking people those questions. I think LGBT people often find it really affirming to be directly asked so they don't have to volunteer that themselves repeatedly. And then to be mindful of using the same language that that person uses to describe themselves when you are making reference to them. And language is really important. Another area is, for example, if someone's talking about their same-sex partner, it's really important that we don't then start referring to that person as someone's friend, because that can be really dismissive and damaging to them. One of the other main things is agencies can consider whether there is a need for a specialist service or a specialist worker within their organisation or within their area who can provide a specialist tailored support to LGBT people or LGBT young people so that their needs can be met in a different but hopefully equal way to non-LGBT young people.